A millionaire patient pretends to be in a coma. Then hears his nurse's heartbreaking confession. There was a thin line between life and death, and Julian Blackwell had decided to walk it. It was not courage that made him stay silent. It was the understanding that silence, in this case, was the sharpest weapon. The world believed Julian was in a coma, hovering somewhere beyond reach after the brutal attempt on his life. A car accident that was no accident at all. The media called it a tragedy. His family called it an opportunity. The sterile walls of the private clinic muffled all sounds. Julian lay unmoving, day after day, beneath the heavy smell of antiseptics. Machines blinked beside him, whispering the rhythm of his stolen life. Only he knew he was not gone. Not yet. It had been his decision. When he woke up briefly after the attack, something deeper than instinct warned him not to move, not to reveal himself. He remembered voices, low, urgent, familiar. "Better this way," someone said. "Soon it'll be ours." He recognized the voice of his stepmother, Eleanor, the woman who had once held his hand when he buried his father. Another voice, his cousin Marcus, always loyal, always at his side, until now. Julian forced himself deeper into the mask of unconsciousness, suppressing every instinct that screamed to confront them. The days blurred together. Every morning, Eleanor visited. Her perfume, too sweet, too sharp, filled the room. She would sit by his bed, speaking softly, but her words were knives. "You were always too weak, Julian," she said one day, brushing a fake tear from her cheek. "But don't worry. I'll take care of everything." Then there was Marcus. He rarely spoke during his visits. He merely stood, watching Julian with a cold intensity that left no doubt. If Julian ever woke up, Marcus would make sure he didn't stay that way for long. Julian listened and waited. But it was not just them he listened to. It was her. The first time he noticed the difference was on an evening drowned in rain. The nurse entered quietly. She checked the monitors, the tubes, the machines. Then, for a long moment, she simply stood there, watching him. Her name was Nora Ellis. Young, but not naive. Her hands were careful, her eyes sharp. She noticed things others didn't, and that night she hesitated. Just slightly. But it was enough. Julian caught it. The brief tightening of her brow, the glance at the chart, the tiny shake of her head. Something was wrong. She knew it. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Julian felt a flicker of something other than fear. Hope? Days passed. The routine continued. Family visits, medical staff, endless hours alone. Julian practiced. Tiny movements, too small to notice, flexing a finger, adjusting his breath. He needed a way to speak without speaking. And Nora kept watching. One afternoon, when the world outside was swallowed in a golden haze, she came again. Alone. She checked the monitors, then leaned in closer. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered. "But if you can, I need you to know something isn't right. Someone's been altering your medication." Julian wanted to shout, to grab her hand, to weep with relief. Instead, he focused all his will on the tiniest twitch of his index finger. It was almost nothing, almost invisible. But Nora saw it. Her eyes widened. She glanced quickly at the door, then back to him. "You're awake," she breathed. "Aren't you?" Another twitch, a fraction stronger. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted his blanket, pretending to busy herself. "Okay," she said under her breath. "I'll help you, but we have to be very careful." From that moment, the world inside the room changed. No longer a prisoner, Julian became a spy, and Nora became his only ally. Through tiny signs, a breath, a blink, a tremor, they built a secret language. Nora kept meticulous notes, documenting suspicious activities, missed doses, unauthorized visitors, unexplained changes in his charts. Julian pieced it together with her help. Eleanor and Marcus had bribed a doctor to keep him sedated, planning to declare him legally incapacitated and seize control of his vast fortune. He had been a heartbeat away from being erased forever. But now, with Nora by his side, he had a chance. A slim, desperate chance, but a chance nonetheless. One night, as Nora leaned in to adjust his IV, she whispered, "I don't know why I'm risking this. Maybe because you're the only one in this place who doesn't lie." Julian, through the haze of enforced stillness, made another tiny movement. Nora smiled sadly. "Hold on, Julian," she said. "We're going to fight back. Together." At night, the world inside the clinic changed. The corridors emptied, the lights dimmed, and in the heavy silence, secrets moved like shadows. Nora Ellis waited. She timed her visits carefully now, slipping into Julian's room when few others would notice. Her heart pounded every time she entered. If she were caught, if anyone realized what she was doing, she would lose her job at best. At worst, she might end up sharing Julian's fate. But she had made her choice. The first real test came 3 days after their silent agreement. Dr. Reeves, the physician officially assigned to Julian's case, was arguing with another nurse just outside his door. Their voices were low, urgent. Nora pressed herself against the wall, listening. "It doesn't make sense," the nurse said. "He's stable. Why increase the dosage?" "Orders from above," Reeves muttered. "You do what you're told, if you want to keep your place here." The nurse hesitated. "But what if he wakes up?" Reeves's voice dropped even lower. "He won't." Nora's blood ran cold. When they left, she slipped into Julian's room and knelt beside his bed. "They're trying to bury you," she whispered, piece by piece. Julian's hand gave the faintest tremor in response. From that night, they developed a system. Every evening when Nora came, Julian would signal, 1 blink, yes. 2 blinks, no. A faint twitch of his left hand. Danger. It was a fragile language, born of desperation. But it was enough. Nora started taking careful notes. She kept a secret journal hidden beneath a loose tile in the staff locker room, recording everything. Dates of suspicious medication changes, unauthorized visits from Eleanor and Marcus, conversations overheard near Julian's room. Every detail mattered. One evening, while checking his vitals, Nora whispered, "Do you know who did this to you?" 1 blink. "Eleanor." 1 blink. "Marcus." Another blink. Nora's chest tightened. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a breath. "Why, money?" 1 blink. She swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. The betrayal ran deeper than she had feared. Days became a tense rhythm. Pretend everything was normal. Watch for signs of sabotage. Communicate with Julian in stolen moments. And always, the fear of discovery hung over them. It came sooner than Nora expected. Late one night, as Nora changed Julian's IV bag, she heard soft footsteps approaching. Too soft for a doctor. Too cautious for a nurse. She barely had time to straighten up before the door opened. Marcus Blackwell stood there, framed by the dim hallway light. He was dressed too casually for a hospital visit. Jeans, leather jacket, and he was carrying something. A small syringe, hidden half inside his sleeve. Nora's heart froze. Marcus smiled, thin and false. "Working late, Nurse Ellis?" She forced herself to nod, schooling her features into professional indifference. "Just checking his fluids." Marcus's eyes slid to Julian, cold, calculating. "You're wasting your time," he said. "He's not coming back." Nora smiled tightly. "Still, it's my job." Marcus stared at her for a long, heavy moment. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Only when the door clicked shut did Nora allow herself to breathe again. She bent over Julian, her hands trembling. "That was close," she whispered. Julian's right hand twitched. Once, sharply. Danger. Nora understood. They were running out of time. Marcus would not wait forever. Soon, he or Eleanor would push harder, and Julian might not survive the next attempt. That night, as the rain battered the windows, Nora made a decision. They needed a plan, a real one, not just survival. Victory! She returned the next morning during a shift change, blending with the flow of nurses. She carried a small recorder, hidden inside her uniform. She had borrowed it from a friend, telling her it was for studying lectures. Now, it would be the first weapon in their fight. As she adjusted Julian's monitor, she whispered, "I'm going to catch them." Julian blinked once. "I'll record everything. Their visits. Their threats. I'll bring the truth to the world." Another blink. Stronger this time. Nora smiled, feeling the first real surge of hope in days. "We're not alone anymore," she said softly. "We're going to win this." The next evening, she saw the first crack in their enemy's confidence. Eleanor arrived, dressed impeccably as always, her lips painted in a shade of red too bright for grief. She stood by Julian's bed, smoothing his hair with a gesture so false it made Nora's skin crawl. "You could have made this easier, darling," Eleanor whispered. "But soon it'll be over." Nora, hidden just outside the door, recorded every word. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from something fiercer. Determination. When Eleanor left, Nora slipped into the room and showed Julian the recorder tucked into her pocket. "Proof," she whispered. Julian blinked once, slow and deliberate. Together, they had crossed the line from survival to rebellion. And for the first time in a long time, Julian Blackwell did not feel alone. The noose was tightening. Around Julian, around Nora, around the truth itself. But in the heart of the danger, something else was growing. A cold, unbreakable resolve. It started with the first successful recording. Nora played it back late at night, hidden in a supply closet where no one could overhear. Eleanor's voice, syrupy and cruel, poured from the tiny speaker. "Soon it'll be over." It was not enough to convict her. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Each day after that, Nora became bolder. She planted the recorder behind picture frames, inside fake medical equipment, even beneath the folds of Julian's bed. She recorded whispered conversations between Marcus and Reeves, arguments about payments, discussions of final arrangements. Each recording added another thread to the growing web of lies they were spinning, and which Julian and Nora now sought to tear apart. Julian watched it all from his silent prison. He had become an expert in patience, in stillness, in calculation. He had learned to read the smallest signs, the nervous tapping of Eleanor's nails on the windowsill, the way Marcus never looked him directly in the eyes anymore. They were growing reckless, impatient, and that would be their undoing. One evening, Nora arrived with news that made Julian's blood run cold. "They've scheduled a hearing," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "Next week. They want to declare you legally incapacitated." Julian blinked once, a sharp, hard movement. "After that," Nora continued, "they'll have full control. Your companies, your properties, everything." Julian fought the rage rising inside him. He wanted to tear off the wires, to stand and shout the truth. But not yet. Not until they had everything. The plan was simple in theory. In execution, it was madness. Nora would gather enough proof to delay the hearing. Meanwhile, Julian would prepare for the moment he would reveal himself. Not in private, where Eleanor and Marcus could silence him, but in front of the world. They needed an audience. They needed witnesses. They needed a miracle. The break came from an unexpected place. One of the hospital's janitors, an older man named Samuel, caught Nora slipping a recorder into Julian's room one night. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought it was over. But Samuel, after a long, thoughtful silence, simply said, "You're not the first one they tried to silence here." Nora stared at him, unable to speak. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'll help you, but you need to be smart, very smart." That night, Nora learned what Samuel knew. Reeves had been paid off before in other cases. There had been accidents with patients who stood in the way of wealthy families. The hospital was not just negligent, it was complicit. With Samuel's quiet help, they smuggled out copies of the recordings. They hid backups in multiple places, inside air vents, buried inside medical supply boxes, even mailed anonymously to a lawyer friend of Julian's. Someone Nora hoped they could trust. Every piece of evidence was a shield against the inevitable blowback, because they both knew the closer they came to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The first direct threat came the next night. Nora returned to her small apartment to find her door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen, but on her pillow lay a single white envelope. Inside, a photograph of her younger brother, Peter, walking home from school. No note, no explanation, just a message. They knew, and they were willing to hurt anyone close to her. She nearly broke that night, sitting on the floor of her apartment, shaking, tears burning her eyes. She could walk away, pretend she had seen nothing. Let Julian be swallowed by the machine that was already grinding him down. But then she remembered the way he had twitched his finger. The first sign of life, the first silent cry for help. She wiped her tears, picked up the recorder, and went back to the hospital. That night, as she leaned close to Julian's ear, she whispered, "They tried to scare me." Julian blinked twice, his sign for fear, for caution. Nora smiled, a small, fierce smile. "But I'm not leaving you." One slow, deliberate blink. Trust! In the middle of the cold, merciless world, two people who should have been strangers had found a reason to believe. Not in miracles, but in each other. The next phase was the hardest. They needed a way to force a public confrontation, one that Eleanor and Marcus could not wriggle out of. The idea came from Samuel. "The media," he said simply, "they love a scandal. If they could get a journalist involved, someone independent, someone hungry for the truth, they could expose everything in one devastating blow. But finding the right person and getting them inside the hospital would be like threading a needle in a hurricane. Still, it was the only way. As the days ticked down to the hearing, the pressure mounted. More threats, more suspicious accidents near Julian's room, faulty machines, misplaced medication, sudden shortages of staff. It was clear Eleanor and Marcus were preparing for a final move. Julian, trapped in his own body, felt the weight of every hour. But he also felt something else growing inside him. Strength. Every breath, every tiny signal he managed to send to Nora was a victory, a rebellion. They would not win, not this time. 3 days before the hearing, Nora slipped into Julian's room at midnight, her face flushed with excitement. "I found someone," she whispered. Julian blinked once. "Her name is Claudia Moreau. She's a reporter, tough, smart, and she hates corruption." Another blink. "I've arranged for her to visit, as a family friend. We have one chance to get the truth out." Julian's hand twitched. Hope. Real, living hope. The game had changed. The hunters had become the hunted, and the web of lies, carefully spun for months, was about to snap, with a fury no one had expected. The morning Claudia Moreau arrived, the hospital seemed different. The walls, usually heavy with silence, seemed to buzz with an invisible current. A storm gathering, just out of sight. Nora stood by Julian's bed, pretending to adjust his IV, but inside she was counting every heartbeat, everything they had built, every risk, every secret, now balanced on a knife's edge. If Claudia failed, or worse, if she was caught, there would be no second chances. Claudia did not look like a journalist when she entered. She wore a simple dark coat, her hair pulled back. No makeup. She could have passed for a grieving relative. But her eyes, sharp, restless, hungry, gave her away to anyone who knew what to look for. Nora met her in the hallway, her voice low. "Room 214, he's ready." Claudia nodded once and moved past without hesitation. No greetings, no wasted words. She understood the stakes. Inside Julian's room, everything was still. He lay motionless, the perfect image of a broken man. The machines beeped their soft, monotonous song. But as Claudia approached, Julian gave the faintest twitch of his hand. their agreed signal for vigilance. He knew this was the most dangerous moment yet. Claudia sat by the bed, pulled out a small recorder from her coat pocket, and pressed it beneath the mattress. Then she began to speak, softly but clearly. Julian Blackwell, heir to the Blackwell Corporation. Victim of an apparent accident that many believe was no accident at all. She leaned closer, almost whispering, "If you can hear me, if you can signal, I'm here to listen." Julian blinked, once. Then again, Claudia's breath caught. For a moment, her mask of professionalism cracked. "You're awake," she whispered. Nora, standing guard near the door, gave a tiny nod. They were in. Over the next 20 minutes, Claudia asked a series of simple yes or no questions. Through blinks and slight movements, Julian answered, confirming the attack, naming Eleanor and Marcus, describing the plan to keep him sedated, revealing the bribery of Dr. Reeves. Each answer was recorded, a blade sharpening against the lies. By the time Claudia left the room, her face was pale but determined. "You were right," she said to Nora as they slipped back into the hallway. "This is bigger than anything I expected." "Will you help us?" Nora asked, barely breathing. Claudia's eyes flashed. "I'll bury them." But Eleanor and Marcus were not fools. They sensed the shift in the air before they saw it. The next day, security around Julian's floor doubled. Orders came down. No unauthorized visitors. Every nurse and doctor was questioned. And Nora found herself called to Dr. Reeves's office. The confrontation was brutal. Reeves closed the door behind her, his face cold. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ellis." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, keeping her voice even. "You're interfering with patient care, spreading lies. You could lose everything." Nora smiled tightly. "Then maybe you should stop giving me reasons to." For a moment, Reeves looked genuinely shaken. Then his face twisted into a snarl. "You think anyone will believe you over me?" Nora met his gaze without blinking. "They won't have to. They'll hear it themselves." She left the office before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. The time for fear was over. The day of the hearing arrived like the final drumbeat before battle. Julian's family, dressed in black as if already mourning him, gathered in the private conference room set aside by the hospital. Eleanor wore pearls. Marcus wore a smug smile. Dr. Reeves stood ready with his false medical reports. And in the center of it all, Julian, brought in on a gurney, eyes closed, body still. But not for long. Nora stood by his side, her hand lightly touching his. Underneath the blanket, Julian squeezed her fingers. Once. Ready. Across the room, Claudia, now posing as legal counsel for a concerned party, set up a small projector. "I have new evidence," she said calmly. "Before the court proceeds, I believe you'll want to see this." Judge Wallace, an old man with sharp eyes and a sharper sense of politics, frowned. "You may present it." The room darkened. The projector flickered to life. The recordings began to play. Eleanor's voice, dripping with contempt. "Soon it'll be over." Marcus's angry hiss. "He'll never wake up. We'll make sure of it." Dr. Reeves's cold reassurance. "He won't survive long enough to testify." Faces paled. Mouths dropped open. Eleanor tried to stand, to shout, but Claudia cut her off sharply. "Silence, please. You'll have your chance." Then the final piece. A video secretly recorded by Samuel, showing Eleanor handing a thick envelope of cash to Reeves in the hospital parking lot. There was no denying it, no spinning it. The trap had sprung. Julian chose that moment to move. Slowly, painfully, he opened his eyes, lifted his head. The entire room froze. Judge Wallace rose to his feet. Shock etched deep into his lined face. "Mr. Blackwell?" Julian's voice was rough, cracked from disuse, but it carried across the silent room like a hammer blow. "I am very much alive, Your Honor." The chaos that followed was swift and merciless. Eleanor and Marcus were arrested on the spot. Dr. Reeves fled but was caught before he left the building. News spread like wildfire. The great betrayal of the Blackwell family. The silent heir who had refused to die. the nurse who had risked everything to save him. Later, after the reporters and lawyers had gone, after the dust had begun to settle, Julian sat in the hospital garden, breathing in the cool evening air. Nora sat beside him, silent for a long time. Finally, Julian turned to her, his voice low but steady. "You saved my life." Nora shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just refused to let you do it alone." Julian reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "For the first time in my life," he said, "I don't want to fight alone anymore." He looked at her, truly looked. "Will you stay?" Nora smiled, a real, tired, beautiful smile. "I'm not going anywhere." The hardest part was not surviving. It was learning to live again. After the trial, after the news cameras disappeared and the headlines began to fade, Julian Blackwell faced a new, unfamiliar kind of battle. Rebuilding a life that had nearly been stolen. The hospital discharged him 2 weeks after the hearing. The first time he stood under the open sky, without machines tethered to his body, without fear shadowing every step, Julian closed his eyes and breathed. Really breathed. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Beside him, silent but steady, was Nora. She had refused offers from other hospitals. She had turned down a lucrative contract to work for a private clinic that wanted to parade her as a hero. Instead, she stayed. Not because she owed him anything, not because she wanted anything, but because sometimes, when the world shatters around you, the only thing left to hold on to is trust. And trust, between them, was something sacred now. Julian's estate was intact. Eleanor and Marcus faced long prison sentences. Dr. Reeves struck a deal, but lost his license and any future he might have had. Justice was done, but no court ruling could erase the scars. Some nights, Julian woke in a cold sweat, certain he was still trapped in that sterile room, unable to move, unable to speak. On those nights, Nora would sit with him saying nothing, simply placing her hand over his until the shaking stopped. He did the same for her when the memories of threats and cold photographs left her staring blankly at the walls. Healing, they learned, was not a single moment of triumph. It was a long, slow walk through the ruins, together. Spring came. The city softened under the first warm winds, and Julian took Nora to see the old house where he grew up, the one he had stayed away from for years, poisoned by too many bad memories. They stood before it, silent. The house was large, grand, but empty, a shell, just like he had once been. "I used to think," Julian said quietly, "that money would protect me, that building walls, keeping people out, that was the only way to survive." He turned to her, his voice rough. "But it only made me an easy target. I was alone. I made it easy for them." Nora didn't argue. She didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. She just waited, letting him find his own truth. Finally, he said, "I don't want to live like that anymore." He took a deep breath. "I want to build something real, something alive." His hand found hers. "And I want to build it with you." There was no grand declaration, no dramatic music, just a quiet, steady promise made between two people who had seen the worst of the world, and each other, and still chose to believe. Months passed. Julian sold the old house, bought a modest, sunlit home on the edge of the city, a place with a garden, a porch, and enough room for dreams to take root. Nora left nursing, but not medicine. Together, they started a foundation, helping patients without families, fighting corruption in private health care. They named it the Second Breath Foundation, because sometimes the hardest, most beautiful thing in the world is daring to breathe again after life has crushed the air from your lungs. On a soft evening, standing barefoot in the new garden, Julian watched Nora planting wildflowers along the fence. The light caught her hair. The wind stirred the leaves. He realized, not with a rush, but with a deep, steady certainty. He was free. He was alive. He was loved. Later, sitting together on the porch steps, he said, almost shyly, "I used to think strength meant never needing anyone." Nora smiled. dirt smudged on her cheek, her hands in her lap. And now? Julian looked at her, at the house, at the wildflowers growing where once there had been only emptiness. Now I know strength is choosing to need someone, choosing to trust, choosing to stay. Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was not the silence of fear, or pain, or loneliness. It was the quiet of two hearts breathing in the same rhythm. The quiet of a second life, born not from luck or miracle, but from the fierce, stubborn choice to believe, even when everything seemed lost, especially then.